rocks will. So let's lift up our voice on this next part. I need a rescue, come on.
I needed rescue, my sin was heavy.
Come on, let me hear it.
The chains break at the weight of your glory. I needed shelter, I was an orphan. Now you call me a citizen of heaven. When I was broken, you were my healing. Now your love is the air that I'm breathing. I have a future, my eyes are open. 'Cause when you call my name, I ran out of that
second, and I hope this isn't out of line, but I just want to say thanks to Will for personally. We had a lot of transition in the church and as a staff, and he, like the others, has just done a great job. And I just really appreciate your friendship, your leadership, the quality of who you are as a man. And it's been inspirational. And I didn't have the chance, so I just thought I'd bust into worship and do that. So, but thanks to Will.
May be formed, but it won't prosper. When the darkness fills, it won't prevail. 'Cause the God I serve knows only how to triumph. And my God will never fail. Oh, my God will never fail. Sing it. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to the Lord. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to the Lord. There's power in the mighty name of Jesus. Every war he wages, he will win. I'm not backing down to any giant. 'Cause I know how this story ends. Yes, I know how this story ends. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to the Lord. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to the Lord. Sing it. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to the Lord. I'm gonna see a victory. I'm gonna see a victory. For the battle belongs to the Lord. You take what the enemy meant for evil and you turn it for good. You turn it for good. Let's sing it again. You take what the enemy meant for evil and you turn it for good. You turn it for good. Proclaim it with all you got. You take what the enemy meant for evil and you turn it for good. You turn it for good. You take what the enemy meant for evil and you turn it for good. You turn it for good.
Good morning. Is this right, Mike? Am I good? I picked up the right.
Yeah, you did.
I did?
Yeah, that one right there.
Here.
Is this better? Yeah, there we go. How are y'all? Good morning. This rarely, if you get to know me, one of the things that from a leadership standpoint, I like to plan ahead. I really, my personality, I kind of wig out with last minute changes, and so I like to plan ahead. And so last week, when I said, hey, this next week I want to preach one of my favorite sermons, I was really looking forward to that. And Sunday night, Monday, is really wrestling through. And I actually called the staff. When did we talk? Was it Monday? And I'm just knowing this is my last Sunday with you guys. And by the way, I'm so grateful for the opportunity to have been with you. And I'm so thankful that the Lord, in His kindness, has identified Scott. I'm looking forward to him starting in a few weeks. And just be continuing to pray for him and pray for his church. You realize you hiring a new pastor is throwing another church in transition. You realize that, right? So let's not forget to pray for the other church, right? Because us hiring a new pastor means that another church is about to go through a process that you've been through. Okay, so let's not lose sight of that. Okay, but we're grateful, and we know God is kind and can guide them as well. And so I'm processing my last Sunday with you guys, and you got to put up with Zach the next couple of weeks. Where's Zach? Man, what an amazing gift! What a true gift he is. But looking at current affairs and stuff, the Lord for the last several months actually has been working with me. With COVID and with all the racial stuff going on, I've been really processing, like, what does it mean to have a biblical response? Will you throw up the slide? Did you get the slide prep that's up there? So we sang this song. Remember this verse? We sang this? It changes us. What changes us? What Jesus did for us. It changes what we and what we. You're changing everything. That is so. This is a pastor friend of mine that's calling me on a Sunday morning. And I'm sorry for two things. One, I'm so tempted to answer this right now. He knows better than that. I'm not going to. God, that is so tempting to answer that phone call right now. It's the pastor who recorded the sermon. He's off this morning, and he's calling me. He knows I'm preaching. This is so funny. That is quite funny, actually. But it changes what we see. It changes what we seek. You're changing everything. How many of you believe that? No, seriously, as a declaration, raise your hand. If you've been marked deeply by Jesus, how many of you believe that? How many of you have experienced practically this transformation in your soul that is impacting what you see and what you seek? You there with me? It's impacting me. And so as we've been going through this craziness of this world, I've been trying to allow Scripture to change what I see, to change what I seek, to change and influence the way I respond, my opinions. I've been wrestling with that at a personal level. So I shared some of that with the staff this week. And I said, guys, I don't know if this is for Will, Heath personally, and the staff actually encouraged me to share it. So I'm kind of doing a pivot. I'm not preaching what I was going to preach. I'm just going to unpack and just bring you into the process that my soul has been going through. And so I've never actually taught this before. not in this way. So I'm going to more devotionalize with you this morning than preach a sermon. But here's the deal. Be ready. I'm going to expose you to some Will Heath straight up brokenness. I want to kind of go open kimono a little bit with you. And this is not Will Heath standing up, trying to model what it looks like to follow Christ. This is Will Heath standing up in front of you saying, I'm a jacked up person. And I'm gonna kind of bring you into my journey of how God's changing what I see, what I seek, specifically how I respond to things. And so if we're going to be in 3 primary passages, Matthew 5, Matthew 18, and Luke 19. We're going to kind of bounce around. So Matthew chapter 5, starting in verse 21. Now, how many of you in your Bibles have a subject? How many of that section that has a label? What's the label of that section? What's it say?
Murder.
Murder? Anybody else have something else besides murder? Anger? Yeah. Mine, I use the extra spiritual version, the ESV, and it says anger, so we'll go with that. It's the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus is saying, if you have heard it said to those of old, you shall not murder. And whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I You've heard it said, as part of the 10 Commandments, you've heard it said of people of old, that if you murder someone, you're liable. But I say to you, who's the I in this statement? Jesus. He said, but I say to you, that if you're what? Angry. But I say to you, if you are angry with his brother, the implication here is, Jesus is specifically talking about Christian relationships. If you are angry with a brother in the faith, or a sister by extension in the faith, okay, specifically talking about those relationships. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says, you fool, will be liable to the hell of fire. And Jesus is radically redefined. So what he did, he radically redefined. He radically just changed the way that we see, the way that we seek. He took the norms and the spiritual practices, and he just said, turning it. He's pivoting things. He's taking it from an action of the hand or an action, a physical action, and turning it inward and saying, no, I'm dealing with the internal stuff, right? So we've been going through 2 Peter. God has planned to give us everything we need to life and God. He's put things deep inside of us. And as we grow in maturity, these things work out. So what Jesus is doing, he's going to that internal soul level work, and he's saying, I've done something in you, I've done something to you. So I'm going to take the conversation away from what you do with your hands and your fists and your feet. I'm going to turn it into the condition of your heart. I want to be getting at some things. He's digging in. So, verse 23. If you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar. Hey, Jesus, man, I'm here worshiping. Man, I brought some stuff, man. I've got my tithes. I got my tithes right there. Man, I want to come here and worship. I'm getting ready to. At the altar, I'm not concerned about the physical activity that's on display between everybody else. I want you to deal with the deep thing inside of your soul and in your heart, and go deal with that first. Because then what happens in the physical aspect means nothing if the internal transformation isn't taking root. If what we see and what we seek hasn't been transformed in the inside, then what we do on the outside has very little value. Leave your gift at the altar. Now, the context here is anger.
And so we keep reading. Now, if you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, then leave the altar and give your gift. Here's the idea. What he's talking about is somebody has something against you that could be legally liable. Like there could be legal recourse. And we know that's the context because he says, first be reconciled to your brother and then come offer your gift. In verse 25, come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are going with him to court, lest your accuser hand you over to the judge and the judge to the guard and you are put in prison. Truly I say to you, you will never get out of jail or get out until you've paid the last penny. So here's the deal. Jesus is talking about a very specific, he's giving instruction for a very specific thing. If you have violated, if you have done something against another person that could potentially hold you legally liable, if there's a quarrel, go deal with it. Deal with it before emotion in the situation takes over. Okay? Now, how many of you have ever been in a situation, raise your hand, where you've been like afraid of legal recourse against you? Raise your hand. You know what that's like. Go deal with it. Okay? So I'll give you a silly one. This is Will Heath expressing it may sound stupid, and it may seem mundane, and it may seem not consequential, but the reality of it is most of us live in the mundane, don't we? Most of us live in the boring moments that are interrupted by occasional highs and occasional lows, but most of us live life in the. So I want to give you an example out of the ordinary. In my previous house, my neighbor next to us, the two neighbors behind us, they were putting in their fences, new fences. So they tore down, they came and asked, hey, can we put up new fences? Sure, signed off. I signed off on the HOA thing, right? If you live in a community with an HOA, you want to do something, you have to sign off on the HOA. So they gave me the survey, told me where the fence line, signed off on the HOA. My neighbor and I both did. So I get home from work, and the fences are down and the new fence posts are up. Guess where the fence posts were? On my property. He literally took 4 feet of my backyard and my neighbor's. Right? I don't know if it was his instruction or if it was just the fence company doing something they shouldn't have done, but you violated a legal boundary, right? And so me and my spiritual maturity at the time, like, man, I'm so close to Jesus at this moment. You know what I did? Like a 5-year-old kid, I went and I pulled all the posts up because they were still in the concrete. I just pulled them all up and I threw the posts in his backyard. I didn't say anything to the guy. I just pulled him up, threw him in the backyard, right? Man, we're in Texas. We love to own some property, right? I mean, don't encroach on no eminent domain, right? He was eminent domaining my backyard. That's what he was doing. And so he didn't say anything. Next day I come home from work, and the fence posts are where they should be. Great, victory for me, right? Never said anything to the guy. So one of my coworkers, I was a banker at the time doing bivocational ministry. One of my colleagues was coming into the neighborhood. That's about 6 months later. He said, hey, Will, Lindsay and I and the girls are going to be coming in. We're going to one of your neighbors' houses for dinner. We go to church with this guy. He's an elder at our church. We love him. But we're going to swing by. Can we say hey? I said, sure. So they come over on the way to their friend's house. Take a wild guess where their destination was. Guess whose neighbor they were going to, like directly behind my house. And he said, why don't you come over and meet them and say hey? And I'm like, yeah, this isn't going to go great. It's so silly, it's so petty, but here's the deal, like, property lines mean something. I was a banker. Property lines, survey lines matter to a banker, right? They matter to me. But I didn't handle that thing in a way, like he trespassed. He did an overt action, or by just not paying attention to what the fence company was doing and not being clear on that. But I responded in such a petty way. See, the response when somebody has violated, when somebody's done something against you, or when you have done something against them, Jesus says, hey, I'm doing something in you. Before you give your gift at the altar, go, and the response to that quarrel is reconciliation. Be reconciled. That's the biblical response, reconciliation. And so what Jesus is saying, if something's happened, you've got a quarrel or a dispute, you go be reconciled with the person. And the goal of reconciliation is to bring harmony back to the relationship. Now, I was never going to be friends with that. I never saw that person. That we never crossed paths. We didn't go to the same church. But it was my responsibility and his responsibility, quite frankly, to establish equilibrium back in the relationship, to reconcile, to bring it back to where it would have normally been. But because of my pettiness, because of my immaturity, I actually harmed the potential to be in a good standing with my neighbor. It was my fault. Even though he was in the wrong, my response was not one of reconciliation. My response was like that of a third grader picking up their toys and going to a new sandbox. You see, I wasn't seeing the way God wanted me to see. I wasn't seeking reconciliation. What I was seeking and what I was seeing was an offense. And the only thing that I thought about in that moment was how I could correct the wrong that was put against me. You ever been there? You ever been there? Anybody else jacked up like me? Please say yes. Please say yes. And I would love to say that's the only time it's ever happened. I mean, I'm not talking like specifically pulling up fence posts and throwing them. I mean, I haven't done that again, right? But have you ever been petty? Like me? Yeah. I'm glad I'm not the only one. So here's the deal. In Matthew 5, Jesus teaches this principle that if you're at the altar and you realize that you've actually done something against someone, your responsibility is not the physical act of worship. Your immediate responsibility is the act of reconciliation. You get that? There are some of you in the room right now. You're here in worship, but there needs to be some reconciliation work to take place. It just is. So Matthew 5 deals with the person, and Jesus brings to awareness, hey, if you've done something against someone. Now flip over to Matthew chapter 18. In that section right above chapter 15, we're going to be in verses 15 through 20. What's the section? What do your section breaks say there? Do what? Say it one more time. Dealing with a sinning brother. So here's the deal. So in Matthew 5, Jesus gives a pretty specific kind of legal situation. Says, hey, if somebody has something against you, if you're the violator, you go. Now here he's flipping the script and he's saying, hey, if a brother sins against you, so this time if it's not your fault, right? So Jesus is addressing both sides of the coin. If there's been a relational fracture, whether you're the offender or the offended, guess what? Jesus radically transforms the way that you see and what you seek. And he's dealing with both sides of the coin. So listen to this. Chapter 18, verse 15. If your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault. The word sin there, how many of you ever heard the definition of sin being missing the mark? You ever hear that? Sin is missing the mark. This is that classical verse. This is if your brother sins against you. In other words, if your brother actually sins against God, and their disobedience to God spills over into your interpersonal relationship, and then as a result of their disobedience to God, there is an offense that takes place. There is brokenness in the relationship. It's super personal. I had a family member. It's actually my sister, my older sister. She married a gentleman, and we find out afterwards. They're in their marriage a few years, and he's an alcoholic. Pretty aggressive with his family, and I won't go into the details, but picture the ugliness of this disease of alcoholism, and that was played out on my sister and her son. I remember literally driving around Garland, Texas, my older brother and I, driving around in his truck, and there was a loaded revolver in the seat between us. I'm a teenager. And our goal, we went to every place that we thought he would be. And our goal was to kill him for what he did. story. By God's grace, we never found him. But here's what happened. See, the internal person, I wasn't a believer at the time, I came to faith later, but the internal person inside of me, he was violating a relationship with God, and his disobedience to God spilled out in a very tangible, very practical way into our family. So if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault. I was going to tell him his fault, but my brother and I were pretty aggressive in the way we told him. Go and tell him his fault. Between you and him alone. You get that? We're all familiar with this passage, right? If he listens to you, you have gained your brother. But if he does not listen, take one or two others along with you, that every charge may be established by the evidence of the 2 or 3 witnesses. Well, right? We think about this we think about this in context of church discipline, don't we? I mean, you ever studied this passage in the context of church discipline? You ever been there? Right? You're familiar with that. Guys, this is not a church discipline issue. This is a relational brokenness issue. I think we turn it into church discipline, but Jesus, go back to the moment, go back to the context. There's this movement. You start talking about interpersonal relationships. If a brother is sinning, if they're disobeying God, and that disobedience to God is spilling over to you, then you need to go call them out on their sin. You need to extend brotherly kindness. We've talked about brotherly kindness, haven't we? You need to go express brotherly kindness. Deal with that issue. And if they're not willing to repent, take 2 or 3 witnesses so you can document the conversation. And then from there, what does the passage keep saying? If they won't change, then you take them to the church. And then if they still won't change, then you treat them like an outsider and you excommunicate them. You kick them out. Literally, that's what Jesus is teaching here. And here's the principle. Here's the reality. Here's what's happening. Right? Let's go back to interpersonal relationships, broken relationships. We all deal with these. When people disobey against God, and that spills over into the way we relate. There's collateral damage to the relationships we have when we disobey God. And so we take those things to the one-on-one, then in a group, and then to the church, and we kick them out. Here's why. This is a relational exchange between believers because believers are marked by the blood of Christ, right? As believers, what have we received from Jesus? Forgiveness. And so when someone sins against me, I have an opportunity to extend what? And then I go to that person, and if they don't demonstrate a repentant heart, time and time again, what they're doing is they're saying, you know what? They're not actually grasping the depth of what Jesus did in their own soul, and they're acting as though they were never saved in the first place. That's the implications. He goes on to say, just kick them out, treat them like an outsider. Because they haven't actually been transformed. They may be attached to the religious community, but remember, Jesus is here dealing with the internal stuff. Just because somebody's attached to a religious community doesn't mean that they've actually been transformed. So, the reason for the escalation in the passage, verse 17, if he refuses to listen to them, tell the church, and if he refuses to listen to the church, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. The reason for the escalation is to confront an unrepentant heart. A person that refuses to acknowledge their sin against God and by default against other people disregards the work of Christ. And we keep reading this, another passage that I hear completely misapplied. Truly I say to you, whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you bind or loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Again, I say to you, if 2 or 3 on earth agree on earth about anything they ask, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. And here it is, verse 20, right? For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am among them. You realize that passage is in the context of confrontation. It's not a comment about worship. Jesus is saying something about relational confrontation, dealing with sin, getting multiple people involved to correctly articulate what the sin has taken place, dealing with it, making sure we're doing our due diligence internally so somebody's not just manufacturing something because God takes what he did through his son Jesus seriously. Where two or more are gathered, there I am. In other words, when there's conflict, and we have to go this way and there are multiple people involved, you're good to excommunicate. It's heavy stuff, team. It's heavy, heavy stuff. So Matthew 5, the byproduct of sin, somebody has committed an offense against someone else that they could be legally liable for. And the response to that quarrel is reconciliation, or doing everything that you as the offender can do to bring that pain. Is if your brother has sinned against you, if they've missed the mark, they've disobeyed God, that's spilled over to you, then what do? You seek them out. You pursue them. You're the initiator. You're the one who have been violated. You are the pursuer in that relationship. The third area we're going to look at here, Luke chapter 19. You guys know the nursery rhyme, right? Zacchaeus was a wee little man, was he? He climbed up for the Lord. Let's just do straight up Sunday school children's church in here, right? So Luke chapter 19, starting in verse 1. He entered Jericho and I guess they rebuilt it by that point. He entered Jericho and was passing through, and behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was what? And he was seeking to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd, he could not because he was small in stature. So he ran on ahead and climbed up into the sycamore tree to see him, for he was about to pass that way. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and he said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. And he hurried and came down and received him joyfully. And when they saw it, they all grumbled. He has gone in to be the guest of a man who is a sinner. Isn't it funny how, as followers of Jesus, we can assume what Jesus' agenda is? It's interesting. Jesus is here, he's passing through, he should be with his people, but he makes a choice to be with someone that the crowd doesn't understand. It's just interesting, right? Because what Jesus is doing is I think even in the act of being with the sinner, he's attacking and he's pursuing, he's confronted what people see and what people seek. Everybody thought Jesus should do something else. Everybody thought they should be seeking a different direction, but Jesus says, no, I want to go to the place you don't expect me to go. I wonder how many of our agendas need to be blown up, or things that we think about Jesus as priority for us. And just a little sidebar. I wonder how often Jesus would confront our proclivities as believers. Maybe that's a sermon for another day. And Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor. Zacchaeus' confrontation with the Lord, and his immediate response is generosity. So we're going to pass the plates right now. I'm just kidding. But 50% of his holdings he's going to give away to the poor. That's just because he had an encounter with Christ. But keep reading. And if I have what does it say? If I have what? Cheated, or if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it. How much? Fourfold. And Jesus said, today salvation has come to this house, since he also has a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. So when there's a quarrel, the response is reconciliation. When there is sin or an offense, the response is forgiveness. When there is a trespass, When there is someone that has literally stolen something, the response is restitution. Now, to understand what restitution is, you got to go back to Leviticus chapter 6. Don't turn there. I've got it marked in my Bible. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, if anyone sins and commits a breach of faith against the Lord by, check this out, by deceiving his neighbor in a matter of deposit or security or through robbery, or if he has oppressed his neighbor. Now, I'm not going to go there with the racial stuff, but go back and read that passage again on your own time. For those who have oppressed his neighbor, or has found something lost and lied about it, swearing falsely, if any one of all the things that the people do and sin thereby, if he has sinned and he has realized his guilt and will restore what he took by robbery or what he got by oppression, or the deposit that was committed to him by the lost thing that he found, or anything about which he has sworn falsely, he shall restore it in full and shall add, check this out, a fifth to it. In other words, if you steal $100 from me and you seek to restore that, you don't repay me $100. You know how much you repay me? $125. Here's the principle of restitution, what we are seeing with Zacchaeus. When you steal something from someone, when you violate their boundaries, the response is not to give them what you took. Because the effort that it takes to restore and to bring it back to level costs more than the value of what was taken. It costs more. If you steal something from me, you put me at a deficit. And the only way you can bring me back to normal is you bring more back to me than you stole. Here's the deal. It costs more to replace than it does the value of what was stolen. When I was in college, I cheated on a quiz. I've been saved about 6 months. I won't ask anybody in here if you cheated on anything, but I did. As a new believer, I felt about this big. Now, I'd never felt conviction. It wasn't the first time I cheated on anything. I felt the weight of heaven on my shoulders, man. I couldn't sleep. The Spirit was kicking my butt. So I go to my professor. I said, man, here's what I did. I'm sorry. I just want to let you know. What do you think he did? Do you think he's let me retake the quiz? No. I failed the quiz. He gave me a 0. I'm sitting there, man, I confessed. You're supposed to extend grace. See, here's the deal. I cheated. I violated the terms of it. I stole information to get ahead. And for me to bring my overall average back up, I had to work 10 times harder to get my grade where it could have been if I wouldn't have just cheated in the first place and spent a few more hours studying more. It was my laziness. And it cost me more effort on the backside. And we see that with Zacchaeus. If I have defrauded anyone, I'm going to pay him back. Not the 25%, I'm going to pay him back 4 times. He knew the law. He's going above and beyond. Because Jesus did something. Jesus, when he hears this, he says, oh, salvation's taking place in here today. Because there was an internal motivation. We don't know that Jesus confronted him. We don't know what led him to be generous and then to move into restitution. He just did. And what Jesus is saying, that salvation is taking place. There's something that's happened inside this guy's heart, and it's coming out in the way that he lives. So here's the deal, okay? When we have a quarrel, the response is reconciliation. The biblical response. If we are genuine about letting Jesus change what we see and genuine about letting Jesus change what we seek, which all of you said you were, praise God. When there's a quarrel, as believers, your response is reconciliation. When someone has sinned against you, your response is to model that which what has been done to you, and you are to forgive. I mean, I gotta forgive my former brother-in-law. That's a hard pill to swallow for me. I'm just telling you. I had to forgive that guy? What? Do you know how many times I think about that? I had to forgive him? And you know how many times Jesus takes me back to the cross? Remember what Peter said? He who lacks these qualities, either blind or short-sighted, having what? Forgotten the purification of his former sins. So if I cannot extend forgiveness, I'm not actually assimilating the thing that Jesus did for me. So the response to a quarrel is reconciliation. The response to sin is forgiveness. The response to a trespass is restitution. I've been processing all of that. I'm like, what does it mean? Like really, I mean, what does it mean really to have a biblical response in the craziness of the times that we're in? What does it mean to actually let Jesus invade what we see, what we seek, and to let it impact our relational dynamics? What does it mean for you as a husband and a spouse, a wife, to behave in a biblical manner to your spouse? What does it mean to respond to news coverage, not as a Republican or a Democrat, but as a believer in Jesus Christ? What does it mean? What does it mean? John chapter 13, we're almost done here, church, I promise. John chapter 13, verse 31. When he had gone out, Jesus said, Now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, he's talking about himself, God will also be glorified in himself, and glorify him at once. Little children, yet a little while I'm with you. You will seek me, and just as I said to the Jews, so now I also say to you, where I am going you cannot come. A new commandment I give you, that you what? That you love who? Remember that one another. Hold on to that. Just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another. By this, you guys know this, by this all people will know that you are my disciples if you have what? Get this. Jesus is saying, get this, the platform of your influence moving forward is how you relate to one another. The platform isn't your programs, isn't the preacher, isn't the technology, isn't the buildings. All those things are great tools. The thing that is actually going to demonstrate that you are mine, men shall know that you are my disciples, that you have love one for another. And so when we as believers run into relational conflict, guess what love means? If there's a quarrel, love means reconciliation. If there's sin, love means forgiveness. If there is a trespass, love means restitution. That's what it means. This demonstration of oneness together. Now flip forward just a few chapters. John chapter 17. I won't read the whole passage. This high priestly prayer. This is what Jesus was groaning for. This is what Jesus wanted for us. I'm just going to read a couple of highlights. Verse 11, and I am no longer in the world, but they are in the world. He's talking about his disciples, both current and future. And I am coming to you, Jesus, God, I'm coming to you. Holy Father, keep them in your name, which you have given me, that they may be what? Even as we, hey Daddy, even as we were one, keep them one. Fast forward just a few verses, verse 22. The glory that you have given me, I have given to them. Unbelievable. God is, what did Peter say? That you can participate in the divine nature. Jesus is saying, the glory that you have given me, you'll give to them also. I've given to them that they may be what? One, even as we are one. I and them, you and me. See, here's the deal. I think, and we're living in some crazy, crazy, crazy times, aren't we? what does it mean to actually be mature in times of uncertainty? What does it mean to instead of saying mature, what does it mean that Jesus is affecting what we see, what we seek? One of the ways is how we handle interpersonal conflict with people in this room, with other people in the church, even believers that don't go to this church. Just believers we know. The thing that all three of these responses have together is initiative. The parties involved in the relational fractures must engage in a process to restore what was broken. When there is a relational fracture, there must be a tangible response. Because God initiated a tangible response when He sent His Son out of heaven and His Son physically died. And His Son actually rose. There was a tangible expression of restoration, but sin is still taking place and is still fracturing relationships. And if we actually want to be known as His disciples, then our response must be care for how we relate to one another. Husbands, wives, daughters, fathers. I say daughters because I have 3 girls, have 3 beautiful girls. Here by Kira, dude, knocked it out of the park. Where is she? Is she still in here? No. Unbelievable, man. Beautiful voice. The thing we must fight, and this is the last point I want to make here, and we'll part ways. The thing that we have to fight as believers is a mismatched response. It's going to hit some of you. It's hit me. The one that is sinned against, and if there's sin that takes place, what's the response? It's forgiveness, right? But the one that is sinned against in a hyper what's the word? Offended culture. People get offended so easily these days. The person that is sinned against, oftentimes they don't want to they don't want to extend forgiveness. They want the offender to apply restitution. Oh, you offended me, you sinned against me, so you owe me something. No, they don't. They show you forgiveness. And as a believer, when you're sinned against, one of the ways that you demonstrate that you are His is you actually right-size your expectations. So if somebody sins against you, the response isn't restitution. The response is forgiveness. So you have to be willing to actually, what? Forgive. Don't mismatch your response. If you're the one that does the trespass or you've stolen, don't just simply ask for forgiveness. That's not enough. The response, you have to, if you took the time to steal, when you're confronted and the Lord's dealing with you on that, take the time to put in the work to overcome. In 2013 and 2014, Allie and I spent some time in marriage counseling. Largely my fault, by the way. It wasn't enough for me to say I'm sorry. You know what I had to do? Work. It cost me more on the other side of my trespass against my wife. I didn't cheat on her, nothing like that. It's just neglect. I had to work harder on the other side to restore the relationship. And I'm grateful I had the counselor that we did. I'm grateful for the men in my life that called me out. And I can honestly say Allie and I are, after 21 years of marriage, our marriage is better now than it's ever been. But if I didn't do the hard work of restitution. So here's the point. When relational fractures happen, here's what I want you to do, church. I want you to locate what the offense is. Understand what, because not all sin is the same. Not all sin is the same. So number one, understand what it is. Are you in a quarrel? Is it just somebody being disobedient to God and spilling over into your relationship? Did somebody steal something from you? Locate what the issue is, and then right-size your response to that. Don't right-size your response to what your lost friends say, or what the gossip thing section says, or what the political parties say. We stand on the Word of God, and we allow the Bible to right-size our response. I think the world is crying out. I think the world wants to see what it means for believers to actually be believers. I think think one of the greatest ways we can demonstrate, one of the greatest ways you can demonstrate as a believer in Christ, is to be mature in the way you respond to relational fractures. Let the Bible influence you, not a lost world. Amen? Worship team, come up. I'm going to ask you if you would be so bold and crazy during this time. Husband, wife, if you need to deal with an argument you had in the car before you got here. Allie and I have I tell you, the church parking lot has ended a lot of arguments in my family. Maybe y'all aren't that way, but it's been that way for us. Not all the time, but it's happened. Husband, wife, if you need to deal with something, don't lift your hands and sing. Talk to your spouse. Hey kid, young people, teenagers, young people, if your parents have done something to offend you, don't hold that in and be bitter. Go say, hey, Mom, Dad, you really ticked me off. This is what you did. Hey, Mom, Dad, listen. Or vice versa. If you got a kid in the room and they made you mad, they're not listening to you, they're not obeying you, tell them. Don't let it fester. Deal with it. If you got a relationship in the room, deal with it. Don't lift your hands as an outward expression that you're in worshiping. God's more interested in what you're doing, what's going on inside of your heart and your soul. Maybe the person you have something with isn't in this room. Here's the deal. Don't go to lunch. Go to their house. If you won't want to go to their house because of COVID, pick up the phone and call them. Swallow your pride. Jesus swallowed his. Deal with the church.
guys go ahead and take a seat. We have one last thing to do before we dismiss you guys today. I'm just going to ask Will Heath to come back up to the stage. Me and the rest of the staff a lot about the church, about Christ, and what we're supposed to be as a staff. And so, man, with just the most sincere feelings, we just want to thank you because you came in a time of turbulence and you led us until we had our next senior pastor, Scott, coming in 2 weeks. And so, can we just get a round of applause?
I'm not trying to like out-compliment Zach, but I just want to say, like, because of COVID, really trying to locate where my influence in the church would be. It's really not with the people. I don't know hardly any of you, and I just don't. Like, I'm just a guy talking on the stage to most of you, and I wish it was different. I really do. But my greatest joy in this time is actually to work with your staff. Guys, I've worked with a lot of staff around the country, a lot of church staff, and I mean this. I wouldn't trade any of your staff for anyone. Incredible. They love you as a church, and they love the Lord. They're smart, good at what they do. They work their tails off, and they just. I mean that. Heather, Amanda, Zach, Sean, Josh, and you guys are awesome. Thank you for putting up with me for these 2 months. Love you guys. I really do. Y'all are awesome.
We appreciate you, brother. So with that, we have your own First Baptist Prosper Rock, which I'm sure you've heard a lot about. So those are worth a lot, probably about $4 actually. But they're worth a lot here, First Baptist Prosper. And last but not least, we have a bouquet for your lovely wife, Allie.
Because there's a lot of fans, right?
So it's provided by Prosper Balloons, which is Kio's mother. So just want to thank you and say we love you. And with that, can I have Jason go just up to the stage? I'm just going to ask Jason, say a prayer over you, Will. And I mean, we know you've got your consulting business, and I said you have a bright future ahead of you, but you've already living out that future that God has planned for you. But we do just want to pray God's blessing over you, brother, and all that you do, that it would be blessed and build the kingdom of God. So, Jason.
Hey, real quick, you know what's totally crazy about these 2 gifts, specifically the rock and the flowers? Like, in the Bible, there's constant memorials at the memorial building, constant moving of rocks. I have a rock collection. No, seriously. Like, I have a rock collection, like significant moments for me. And, man, we've been here long enough. I won't tell you what the opportunity to serve you in this time means to me. This is going in my rock collection. And my wife used to own a flower shop. And so, those are really pretty flowers. Like, she's going to love those flowers. Thank y'all very much.
Let us pray. Father, it was by no accident that you brought Will into our midst with a specific skill set that you knew we needed. Father, thank you. Thank you for his willingness to be led by you. Thank you for your provision for our time. Lord, I pray for he and Allie. I pray for their marriage. I pray for their family. I pray for his mom. I pray for his business, Lord. I pray that in everything that he does, he seeks you with all his heart, with all his soul, with all his mind, with all his strength. And I pray through that, Father, that you will bless the work of his hands. That you will give him favor. You will be gracious to him. You will open doors for him that he does not even know about right now, Father. Lord, I just pray that you will use him mightily for your kingdom. And that we will be able to celebrate with Will and Allie the great successes that are to come. As you continue to show yourself mighty, Lord. Lord, we love you. We praise you. We ask these things in your name. Amen.
Will be up here on the front. If you guys want to come say just a goodbye and thank you to him, he'll be here. Lift that church. Go be salt and light. We love you guys. And we'll see you next Sunday.